And then the 30th of October, we'll have the second part in that series of public talks. And in addition to that, more details will be forthcoming, but we'll be hosting Geshe. I believe it's the third weekend of November, right, Dave? So more details. Yeah, so more details will be coming about that. And also check back on our calendar for the subsequent installments of the Haruka and the Vajrayogini teachings. And on that note, I see we're about 1 minute to the hour. So feel free to grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, make yourselves comfortable, and I'll invite Geshe down. We can get started. All right, everybody. So just a brief video check and a brief sound check. Can you see both Geshe and myself fairly clearly? All right. And again, Teslata. Can you hear Geshe? Can you hear Geshe as well?
Yes.
So he's greeting all of the Dharma friends. So in whichever place you find yourself, because actually all of us are joining online today, Geshe said we should have the feeling that we are participating in this teaching in the same environment, that we are close together. And remember also the purpose of our gathering. The purpose of our gathering is to be able to gather the causes of that lasting ultimate happiness. So how do we achieve temporary happiness? How do we achieve ultimate happiness? We need to know what we should do to work towards those things. And we understand that if we trace it back, this temporary and ultimate happiness both depend upon the mind. So what we need to do is work on or transform our mind. That is the task. So there are many coarse aspects of the mind and many subtle aspects of the mind. And in effect, actually, we need to train all of them. But, you know, we don't need to do everything right from the beginning. So what we can do is just sort of listen to the teaching with a kind of receptive mode, receptive way of thinking, and then apply those things kind of that make sense.
어땅으로서 강가 안에 시케레면 제바시라면 this 대시지 그거야 이자 대시 용화를 다 신자고 본다고 가는 것도 그거야 알잖아 시대만이 롬타시니 어떤 리브끈이 저다시 세를 좋아하네라 어다 디토는 니가 대시 다두게 대시 대야면서 자치 못 주는 거야 알았어
Ji dempani lam tabsheni jebukuni roali. So then, in terms of whether we consider ourselves a Dharma practitioner, in other words, formally a Buddhist or not, in one way, there's not much of a difference because no matter how we label ourselves, we are still seeking that happiness, right? And so as we seek that happiness, then the sort of path that gets us there is presented as the basis, the path, and the result. So the basis here is the basis of relative and ultimate truth. Some people say conventional and ultimate truth. The path are the practices of method and wisdom. And the result are the two bodies of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya. In other words, the truth body and the form body.
어다 미킨 데시 자도 전에 타투된 데시 자는 단도 코로포게 노빈도도 제 도보시는 거야 아마도 어떤 니가 코로포게 지금 말레비게 데시 돌아요 할레비 고대원이 줘서요.
And so of course when we think about it from the ultimate result that we're trying to achieve, you know, then we're cultivating kind of in a Dharma way in thoroughly Buddhist practices. But the thing is, contained within all of this information are also things that are going to help people who maybe do not consider themselves Buddhist to work towards that lasting happiness. Right? So all of that information is there.
사실 미셔도 소소소소도 좋아하고 요추그래 되는 단다 든지지네 치코로 지대만이로 다시는 저 끈이서 알셀지냐 이건도 또 간데스랜드 인지면저 다도 제소다 같이 모르스.
So Geshe said, of course, you're allowed to kind of have doubts and ask any questions that you want to about these matters, right? We have question and answer at the end of the session. But just as a beginning step, try to remember these three sets of two: the basis of relative and ultimate truth, the path of method and wisdom, and the result of the two kayas or the two bodies. This is going to be really helpful.
어때래? 다시 덴바니 생각돼서 그게 거대 와서나 노아 그저 덴바. 내서 대도 덴바 생각할 레비트는 리라고 거야지 뭐야.
So there's actually an easy way to approach the understanding of this first set of two, the basis or the foundation. We can say that relative truths are appearances. So relative truths are appearances. Ultimate truths are the actual mode of abiding. Ultimate truths are the actual mode of abiding. So I sometimes say, in terms of the actual mode of abiding, because that's maybe a bit jargony, I say the way things really are. So those that's an easy way to understand those two.
어다 더가롱기네 단다 텔리주 고대와서 이나 노아 그저 덴바 세레 노아 강가 덴바 마르다 전에 좀마오 뭐요 아래 고요 아래.
And so what do we understand if appearances are the relative truth? We understand from that word relative truth, right, that a lot of the appearances we see aren't completely in accordance with reality. There's a lot of the aspects of the appearances that are false.
다 빼나가서 다 잘라서요 이내래 못자뇨와 이내래 구마뇨와 이내래 그래 카드 그렇지 노한테 따가 말아왔어. 노로 요한다 따그래 파쇼네 따그래 수쇼네 따 가세 터다 비타바 따그래.
So to use like a conventional or a worldly example, say that you're going to make a big investment, like for example, you're buying a house or a car. You don't just kind of look at the house or the car from the outside and decide, okay, I'm going to part with my money and buy it right away, right? You want to like look inside the car. You'll want to look under the hood inside. You'll want to see all of the parts of the house. You want to examine the foundation and so forth. You'll want to check it really carefully before you buy it.
다 나로서 다 체주 간디스이나 용어대한테 노아 코를 찾아내라. 디쇼를 뜨가로는 돈에 텔레까지는 가서 노아 되는 거야.
So actually, in terms of the relevance of this relative truth, so many of the problems and the difficulties that we encounter come from us engaging or believing from the initial appearance of whatever object, right? That causes us so many difficulties.
다 내서 대도 덴바 잘라봐 이자 당연히 아주 내가 가리나 코로 내가 체주 간디스이나요. 만우아지 그거 요나 저 내서 될 빠지서 가래.
So in terms of ultimate truth, why is this important? Because when we really think about it, if we want to kind of progress, if we want to meet our goals, whether it's a bigger goal or a smaller goal, understanding the actual mode of abiding of things, how things really are, is really important information to understand.
빼나가로서 말로가 니까리나. 말로가 니까라 다 라와 공바 다 야가 누가 내서 뭐 지샤야지 요아레스.
Yeah.
하고서
Milam kapla.
말로가 다 만다 다 연다 만다 내서 뭐 지샤용 거 좋았어. 대샤비가라 드니가 좀 딱해지고 요봐. So
if we think, for example, when we are in a dream state, right, we perceive many phenomena or objects within our dream, the mountains, the rivers, different objects, different people, forests, fences, houses, and so forth. And so there are all of these appearances that arise.
하고서와 어다 드니서 대대바 이는 드가로 노아 드가로 코르타니 대대바 이는 지바시야요 기고시야요 다다 노안 담라시야요.
And if we just accept those appearances as they are, or engage with those appearances as they are, we have all types of experiences in relation to that, right? Some of those appearances might give us a good feeling, might propel us to good things. Some might be very frightening in our dreams, right? There might be an appearance that makes us feel very frightened or gives us a very unpleasant feeling.
된다를 저기 강가 지레 되네. 코로 파션 지요 바지도 파테모다게 요바 노안다 만다 강가 저기 지르 왔어.
But in terms of the experience that we have, in terms of the appearances of those objects that are coming forth in our dreams and so forth, ultimately we understand that all of those appearances have one maker, we could say, soken, or one source. And if we understand that once, so that source, that maker is oneself, in other words, one's mind. And if one understands that, and if one can carry that awareness into the dream, then, for example, this appearance will not cause fright or discomfort, right? Because we know what the source is. And this connects with that line in the Heart Sutra that says that form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So what we understand is there is a form that appears, but in terms of where that form arises, it arises from that sphere of emptiness. So that's one thing we need to understand. And so we could say that all of these appearances, they are emanations. And where are they arising? What are they emanations from? They're emanations from this ground of emptiness. This is one way of looking at it. And so if we can sort of think along these lines of reasonings, then we'll start to get to what we referred to earlier as that ultimate mode of abiding. If we follow this line of reasoning, we can see how many of the aspects of the appearances that arise to us are false. And in this way, our experiences of attachment or anger, those afflictions arising in conjunction with those various objects, those can be gradually reduced and cleared away. So this was an easy presentation, Geshe said, a very, very rough presentation of this first of the three sets of two, which is the basis or the foundation of relative and ultimate truth. And so we've established that basis of those two truths. Then from that, how do we now come to the path which is the cultivation of method and wisdom?
찌찌보지요 말이 찌찌를 땜바래서 그거 알았어.
Kunzob demba. So relative truth, this word relative truth, relative shows us that things do not arise in and of themselves, right? Relative has that also concept of relation. In other words, things arise in dependence upon each other, in relation to each other. So that's another comment about relative truth.
어따 찌찌를 땜바 이상 알아서 아니 대시 부서 봐. 니가 대시 타두게 대시 강가로로 예를 땜바래. 예를 띠바래서 그거 되고 그거 알았어.
So if we understand relative in terms of this relationship, we understand that the perfect happiness that we are seeking, which we mentioned at the beginning, this does not come about sort of within a vacuum. It arises in dependence upon others, right? It arises in relation to others.
어따 소소 찌보 대시 손을 또 마대 예 자체머래 예 가체머래. 소소 찌보 대시 손을 또 마대.
Yeah.
소소 대시 예를 띠바래 예 자체머래 가체머래.
Right. So even if you're not so concerned about the happiness of others, even let's say that you're worried about getting yourself figured out. You're worried about getting your own happiness. Even if that's the case, your own happiness depends upon others. So you can't escape that relationship to others, even if you're searching for that happiness. And so here then we come to understanding this. We come to the next set of two, and specifically we come to the path of method and wisdom. Loso. Yeah.
세는 단단 텔라 때네.
Yeah.
그저 데메네스 텔라 때네 다 제와지 네스 텔레 용도 와스.
야 보고 성견 소소 가리승기 듣고 와서 눈이 좀.
덴바니는 그저 덴비게 네스 텔 찌질 덴바레스. 나로서 대화 강가 예를 덴바레.
Yeah.
예자 첨보레.
Ale, loso. So when we think about it in this way, we understand relative truth, that when we speak about our happiness, right, that this happiness depends upon others. Therefore, we understand that others are important and precious. Therefore, this feeds into the path aspect, specifically the method side of our practices of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. So we see that the reason love, compassion, and bodhicitta are important, all of these relate to this relative truth, and especially in terms of that relative aspect of dependence upon other sentient beings. And so our inability to generate effectively love, compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth, the obstacle here is the afflictions, right? The unwholesome minds. So if we investigate what's happening with those afflictions in terms of how they are arising, how they are apprehending and grasping at things, we will see that they are incorrect, right? Because there is this lack of true existence. And to understand that lack of true existence, then we come to the second part of that set of two of the path, which is wisdom, right? The wisdom comprehending the nature of reality. So whether the chu kemi lengen rang dun chu ku kandis lagi re. Ale. Yes. So okay. So if we practice these aspects of method and wisdom, we're very kind of vast today. Yesterday we were very focused and detailed. Today we're kind of vast. So just changing the channel in my brain. So the practices of method and wisdom, right? If we use them, even putting the talk of Dharma aside, right? We talk about the result as being these two bodies, one of which is the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya is the way through which one's own welfare is achieved. So the secular person approaches these as, okay, these paths of method and wisdom, they lead to this result of that feeling of welfare or that feeling of happiness. So from cultivating that method and wisdom, right, even somebody who's not necessarily a religious or a Dharma practitioner, they can experience a relaxed and happy life, right? So that is the result. That is like sort of a similitude, sort of a tiny sliver of that Dharmakaya. And so from a Buddhist perspective, right, it's even more important. These practices of method and wisdom are what allow us to accumulate the causes of achieving this Dharmakaya, this truth body of a Buddha, through which one's own welfare is achieved. And also what we'll see is that practicing the method part of this, it's really transformative in terms of our behavior, right? So if we're working on cultivating love, compassion, or even bodhicitta, then in terms of our conduct, there will be no sort of question of willfully harming others, right? We'll naturally be refraining from harming others. So of course, we also talk about the body of a Buddha through which we achieve the welfare of others, which is the Rupakaya, or the form body. The similitude of this, the thing similar to this, like a sliver of this, is engaging in conduct which is not harmful and which at best benefits others. So Geshe said, you understand the connections now between the basis of the two truths, relative and ultimate, the path of method and wisdom, and the result of Dharmakaya, Rupakaya, in other words, truth body and form body, right? So try to remember this set of three twos. So we should think about these again and again, because these are actually the basis through which we can achieve all of that happiness that we are thinking. And if we familiarize ourselves with these points and think about them again and again, more and more, we'll see how there is actually very much that we can cultivate here. Say that, I guess maybe some of us are feeling tired like myself, and so now we will do a brief meditation to relax the mind. Yeah. So put the body and mind in a relaxed state. Let us think I am placing the body and mind at ease.
Jachi balanda madachi mumbochita shucheji mumbonduas balanda mudaya nusayo jatsoni siyore patasayo jasol patandu yares.
So we know that on the ocean, there are many waves that are rising and falling away. Some of those waves are very big and rough. Some of them are relatively gentle, but they're all the same in that they both arise from the source of the ocean and then they dissolve, they fall away into the surface of the ocean. Because ultimately the nature of the mind is something that is neutral. We have this ground, which is like the calm surface of the ocean. And any of the things that are perturbing us, that are disturbing us mentally, we can see them rise, but we can also have them fall away back into this smooth surface, which is the neutral nature of the mind. So think now, having tapped into this neutral nature, the mind is peaceful. It is even.
tela tenetani leyo ta kanga kayumbo lelenda wasta yabo chason sopachi.
And from the mind being at ease, the body also feels kind of light, kind of well and at ease, fast.
Tenyo rongi lichin wana ta sonotuke semde korogumo rongi sawa ta zuma halaya ta rongi yaboji sopachi.
And so think now within this relaxed body, now that this is relaxed, I can focus on the mind. And when I strip back, I see that the fundamental nature of the mind is pure luminosity, a pure and vast luminosity.
소소 근데바 노지 강에 치주 간지지나 매바서 토야 대시 간지지나 다 치더 토야 콜 롱지 니파치요 스파치.
This fundamentally pure and luminous nature of the mind means that whatever is disturbing me, any problem, big or small, I am able to clear it away using the power of the mind. And whatever is giving me happiness, whatever is giving me joy, I am able to cultivate this based on that fundamental nature of the mind.
주 빠빠 노지 tene 강에 쳐준다 라테 데키다 로이다 정말 뭐지 하래 스파치.
So we can think that these afflictions and disturbed minds and so forth that upset us, that cause us suffering, these aren't the mind itself. They are like sort of a skin of an onion, something that cover the mind, but they are adventitious. They can be peeled away or removed.
강에 저도 지바트 로보와 이자 근된다 원도 만나 보tere 코세도 녀도 템보데 토케도 말에 소파치.
Whatever problem, whatever affliction is disturbing us, this is not the nature of the mind itself, right? Because it's adventitious, we understand that it's just like a guest that is with us for a while. It will eventually leave and we can help it to depart.
세코로 다 쇼바던데와 이지던데와 제와던데와 가제 슈이처런도나 강에 강가마 추르추는도 고 인도하지 요아래.
So we also understand that if we tap into this nature of the mind and we cultivate things, really, really important things like patience, love, compassion, as the mind is imbued with these, then those problems that are disturbing us will naturally diminish and eventually dissolve away. But whether we're actually able to actualize that, whether our efforts in that are successful or not, right? It doesn't depend on any external factor or anyone outside. It depends upon ourselves, our own cultivation.
So
think I'm trying to, with the mind imbued with joy and also relaxation, in order to facilitate it. With joy and relaxation, I will try to cultivate these qualities of love and compassion.
Teta soma nuji yuwa chitas zichita sohata yo sompitonita rahis.
Lagi.
Teta soma nuji yuwa shu sompitonita sohata yo sompachi.
So I'm going to make praises and requests that just as I have aspired to here, that this may be actualized.
Lama yuto sunji shose kanga tunyewi goni tarum sosol zideyo sombachi.
And think as we make these requests, pleased with our motivation, right? The lamas, yidams, buddhas, bodhisattvas, spiritual teachers, they manifest this aspect of being pleased with us. So we'll do the preliminary recitation. Tumba chom den de de je ba tra chom ba yon da ba zo be song ge re ba dang sha tsu den ba de war she ba ju de ke ba ke bu du alo gyur wa la na me ba la do min hong gi tem ba song ge chon de gyo wa sha gyo du ba la cha se lu che de gyo zu chi ho den ba chom den de jin she ba da chom ba yon da ba zo be song ge re ba dang sha zu den ba de wa she ba ji den chen ba che gun de ye ka lo gyur wa la na me ba la do mi no ji den ba song ji chom den de e ja wa sha ja du ba la cha ze lo che de ja zu ji wo den ba chom den de ji she ba da chom ba yang da ba zu be song ge she ba no sha zu den ba de wa she ba she de chen ba che bu de we ga lo jo wa la na me ba la do mi no gi den ba song ji chong den de pe ja wa sha ja du ba la cha se lu che de ja zu ji. We'll do a short mandala and then the refuge. So ji bu gi jo ji me do ram ri ram li ji ni de ge ba di song ge rin do me de bu wa jo gu nama da ji che ba jo idam guru ratna mendala kamya dayami. Geshe will lead the final prayer of refuge and bodhicitta.
sonju
Chedon
jidong
sogi
zoju
chenam la
jonala
jangju
jonju
bardo
bardo
dani
dani
gyabsu
gyabsu
ji
dagi
dagi
chishe
chinyen
gibi
gibi sonam gi
sonam
drola
ji
benjir songge
sonju
droba
droba
sho
jo sonju jidong
Chedon
zoju
sogi
jonala
chenam la
jonju
jangju
bardo
bardo
dani
dani
gyabsu
gyabsu
ji
ji
dagi
dagi
chishe
chinyen
gibi
gibi
sonam
sonam gi drola benjir songge
Sonje
droba
droba
sho
jo sonje
Chedon
chedon
sogi
sojo
chenam
jonam
la
jonje
jangcho bardo
bardo
dani
dani
gyalse
gyalse
ji
jo
dagi
dagi
chenyen
chije
gibi
gibi
sonam
sonam
gi
rola
drola benjir
beje
songge
sonje
droba
droba
sho
jo Oya ta tenyo tani oda yongin ju sikal ta ka chewa ani chando to seje sa yuares.
So the activities are important at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And so this connects us within the beginning to refuge and the mind generation. In other words, bodhicitta.
오다 드리지 장난조 버게 로 노안을 쳐봤든지 가야 되라 아니 샹도 아니 로 멤버를 쳐봤든지 가야 되라 노다 세시에 다로 야쇼니데.
And so, as a reminder, that which helps us to abandon an incorrect path in favor of a correct path is refuge. That which helps us to abandon a limited path in favor of a vast path is the mind generation, bodhicitta.
오다 샹도데 그룹에 초예비 띠네라 그룹에 야보냐네라 가제트들 렌데 지보스는 샤와 멤버를 만주바 다가 롱게 용어더니 샤와 치말다 네토라도 뭐 공부 다가 롱게 그때서 저도 야르세요.
So the secret here is, if we're really practicing refuge, that means we're also practicing the commitments of refuge, which means that we are also greatly reducing our engagement in negative actions. And if we are reducing our engagement in what is unwholesome, then right there already, we've established the cause to not fall into the lower realms and from lifetime to lifetime to be in the higher realms of humans and devas.
샤와 시망에 솔런도 더 차게지나요. 샹도 렘바 다가 롱게 니발라 테니다 오 버게 데 예수를 샤와 거 아니라 오다 뭐요 벌도 두고 야레.
There are many stories in the scriptures of people who had engaged in extremely negative, really heavy negative actions to the point that it was almost certain they would go to the lower realms. But through hearing of the practice of refuge and truly cultivating it, they were protected from falling into the lower states of existence, and they were even able to, in some cases, reach realization.
다 간조 샤와 지 니금 리토바서 니 저거 매이자 다 이니 мен저 다 손주지 세가 돈에 다 버게 수치 뭐 자고 야레.
And also, it's not just enough, right, to say, okay, well, I've done what I need to do to make sure I get reborn in the higher realms, for example, as a human for 2 or 3 lives, right? We need to go beyond just that limited picture, which is why the mind generation or bodhicitta is so important.
다 뭐제 질 뭐제가 놀을 찾아봐 이나요. 전에 저와 같이 집에 수근도 왔어. 다가 가르세 모두 마마이게 내가는 집밤에 가르세 안 높이 넘어 봐가지고
And so this practice of refuge has kind of very practical benefits. For example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that because he is able to maintain a stable practice of refuge, he doesn't experience fear in his life, whether from human or non-human beings, right? This is one of the benefits.
오다 대지 잼비 돈에 다시 베이스 가서 터더서도 세도 보긴 되게 같이 뭐 이사레스.
So a continuous mindfulness of refuge so that it really becomes mixed with, connected with our mind is something that is so important, isn't it?
오야 다 레레 진에 그런 수 있다.
So let us, in a relaxed way, just take a moment to develop that motivation.
리톤 짜톤 리톤나 다 데라테는 중앙간가 레레 차가야레스.
When the body is straight and upright, then the channels are straight and upright. When the channels are straight and upright, then the prana, the winds can flow. When the winds can flow, the equilibrium of the 4 elements and so forth can be restored.
Malaya Bota, same Yaboticane. Country like a chigure, Zalavina, Lamazonka, Somba, Yedesona, they shouldn't.
If we want to live a good human life, if we want to cultivate our mind and do something beneficial, then Lama Tsongkhapa said that one who thinks of the welfare of others achieves their own welfare automatically, naturally.
So
that is really an amazing thing about being able to achieve welfare, actually, for both. And so think that with this human rebirth and by cultivating these positive minds, I'm definitely going to try to do that, to work towards the welfare of others. So cultivate a feeling of closeness and start with those human beings you encounter every day, no matter how you feel about them. Expand that to the animals that you regularly encounter, your pets and so forth. Expand that circle gradually to include all 6 types of beings within samsara. So you realize I am close and connected to every single one. There's not a single one that I can point to and say enemy.
So quality of Picalaino, Deshi Sagashi. Only Shonjus and Picala in Ayota, Deshi Sagashi, Tanatane, Sonjiga Deshi Inayota, Musagashi Juju Mato, only Chicho, that my imbachime, somebody.
So think about this vast assembly of beings and think that there is none of those beings that I can point to and say that they have not been a basis for my happiness as an ordinary being while in samsara. There is none of those beings I can point to who is not the basis for my happiness and realization when one becomes a bodhisattva. There is not a single sentient being that I can point to that is not the basis of being able to reach that state of supreme enlightenment of a Buddha. In this way, all those sentient beings are kind.
Tari Mili Yapo, Mutsayapo, the Galata, the Dagi Chetata, Deshi Chet, Deshi Diagichet, Sunji Komboto, so much, you say.
Today, I have achieved this human rebirth, and to make it most meaningful, I definitely must achieve enlightenment for the sake of others. Meditate on bodhicitta.
Tendis on Batella, then Rusoso, Shewa, Tuma Mebanas, I've been young at Kangapa. Or Tashmushitani, that live there was say you want to go so much.
Through bringing forth this powerful mind is explained in the scriptures that all of the negativities that I've accumulated from beginningless lifetimes in samsara until now can be completely cleared away. Thinking I have achieved great purification, tap into the feeling of well-being that brings forth in body and mind. So joyfully and happily, on this basis, I will engage in my study and practice.
뭐야 되지.
So we'll pause there.
당은 그러고 얘긴 저어요. 된다서 이게 되지.
So we finished the motivation.
당 아주 있는도 그래서 다 드리죠 가르래 사람으로 됐다마. 다 자세 도마에서 보고 단 잡아 들어와.
And so this brings us to our main topic of the teaching, which is the 7-point mind training. And so specifically, we are using the commentary by the great Bodhisattva Gyalse Tokme Zangpo.
다 자세 도마에서 보겠더니 그러고 보겠다 파진 로비가를 잘라 그렇게 했더니 바주지와레스 농고지.
로스.
아까서 된지 맞지를 좋은데 다 얘가 다 아마진다고 주소선에 걸어봐 안전을 일하고자 하면 더 같은 쉬워하네스.
So Gyalse Tokme Zangpo was a great being who possessed very strong compassion. It is said that when he traveled, he had like a bull who would carry his things for him. And it is said that when that bull died, he felt just like the same sort of grief almost as if he had lost his mother because of that bull's kindness. And it is said that he was not able to leave the body easily. He really wanted to bring it with him. So that's the kind of being who composed this commentary. So we can say stuff about how compassionate we are, but when you look at the holy beings, you actually see from their conduct their compassion. It's not from words, right? So when we have food and a nice place to stay and we're kind of surrounded by people we get along with, then it's kind of easy to think that we're a compassionate person. But what about when we meet with what is difficult, right? That's the time when we can really have the measure of whether we're compassionate. So from Gyalse Tokme Zangpo not being able to leave the corpse of that bull behind, then the people that were waiting for him, some of his students and followers, they had to wait a very long time.
And
Gyalse Tokme Zangpo said that so Gyalse Tokme Zangpo's teacher, he said that there are many teachers who are superior to me, but out of all of the students of all of those teachers, there is no student who is superior to you. So that was great praise, right, from his teacher, from his Lama. And in this way, we can be confident that the author of this text was a great bodhisattva. So also, when we understand the qualities of the author, we can understand why this is a very precious commentary. And so then in terms of the 7-point Lojong or mind training, how do we kind of get a map for this in the mind? There's just really 7 points that we need to remember. And we can even distill it further into 3 points, which would be the preliminaries, the actual practice, and the branch practices. Preliminaries, actual practice, and branch practices. So the actual practice is really training in bodhicitta. That would be the actual practice. So what do you need to be able to bring forth the actual practice, bodhicitta, in a stable and meaningful way? All of the factors that you need for that are the preliminaries. And once we have brought forth that bodhicitta in order to stabilize and maintain it, what are the things that we need to do to accomplish that? Then we come to the discussion of all of these branch practices. Yeah, so these are like transforming obstacles into the path and so forth. All of these kind of extra teachings, these are the branch practices. So if we can keep kind of these 3 major points in mind, then as we go through the text, it's like a compass. We'll sort of know where we're going. Lo sogi. Nganso di kunla gachin chewar gom di lepson.
Oh, that is good. Oh, yeah, nganso kazo ane da tombo 동봉년도 된도 차와레스 니지 손주지 세니 용화 된도 차이게 잘했어.
And so in terms of what we've covered in the text in the weeks of teachings prior, we covered all of the preliminary practices, and also we roughly covered bodhicitta. And remember, the bodhicittas of the two types, the relative and the ultimate, are both discussed.
다 여러 그 눈에 다 간주 동보 쟁의 손주로 되죠. 다
And in terms of the branch practices, also, we've looked at transforming adverse conditions into the path, or taking obstacles into the path.
다 될었더니 솜비톤에 더니 쟁의 손주로 되죠. 요이톤에 쟁의 손주로 되죠. 이
And transforming obstacles into the path has two ways of doing that. Sampadang jorlam.
요와
Jorwa. So firstly, transforming obstacles into the path through thoughts, through way of thinking. And second, transforming obstacles into the path through action or through behavior.
다 솜비고네 쟁의 손주로 되죠. 될 손주지 그도 손주지 세고네 쟁의 손주로 되죠.
Yeah.
아니 대도 손주지 세고네 되네 그 쟁의 손주로 되죠.
And in terms of transforming obstacles into the path through the way of thinking, we can understand that we can transform obstacles into the path through the way of thinking of relative bodhicitta and through the way of thinking of ultimate bodhicitta.
어다 쟁의 바 간디지도 태바 이나요. 어다 대폭에 디쇼를 만들어 왔지. 쟁의 바 디쇼를 만들어 왔지. 근데 제 디가 냠바 디가 다 그런 전다고 시내는 마로서 손주고 보게 탈로를 보게 더 가지고 그거 하겠어.
So when we encounter that difficulty, when that difficult obstacle or affliction arises in us, the first step is not to go in the direction that it is pulling us, but instead to identify its cause and accordingly apply the teachings of mind training to transform that into a path for the two bodhicittas.
어다 릴로버도요 말아와 대이나이다 갈래 담미탄 때문에 그냥 계속 친구요 알아와.
So that's not something that is easy, right? But if we try just a little bit at first, we can gradually come to a very great profit.
어다 솜바셔 그도 손주 세고 돈이 쟁의 손주로도 저와들 레레 토지 찔라다 사티네 미고요 알아서. 진짜 써서.
네, 가지 나서.
쇼종 지바드는.
쇼장 나빠지바.
지바.
네. 시카레레?
단다서나. 됐을 거야. 예. 다 그도 손주 세고 돈이 쟁의 손주로도 저와들 다 가서 놓자 왔어. 다 릴라고 질라바이나. 예라 때는 쟁의 바 간디서 쇼 다시 소소 놓아 샤소나. 오, 대 키즈바 말에.
So in terms of the mode of transforming obstacles into the path using relative bodhicitta, this means that when we encounter a difficult situation, for example, we're in conflict, somebody's like really upset us, right? We're upset with someone. Using the teachings to understand that it's just the appearance that that person is the cause of my upset, but really, right, the cause of this misunderstanding lies with myself.
가디나 셜로로 반대고 맞주하지. 어다 지조 잘라 조데서 다른 진짜. 아니 다자 말이 봐. 대자be 봐서 다소서 놀러로 와이자. 드리지라 때에 조진 거야.
So really kind of trying to reverse this attitude of pointing at that person or situation that is what is causing my suffering, and instead reversing that, looking within and thinking, what is the ultimate cause of this misunderstanding? And then looking at self-cherishing, the ignorance grasping at the self, and the latencies or imprints left behind as the real cause of that.
어다 그냥 아주 코드자리 킹알지 내가지 킹알지 지스자다 마인도 코스나 센지지레 어다 로리 주는 지지레 어다 가리지 못 주주래 돼야레스.
Another way to do this, instead of pointing and saying, here she is terrible, they're causing me upset, they're behaving in a way I don't like, understanding that that person, he or she or whatever, is a sentient being. They are part of the 6 types of sentient beings within samsara. And all of these 6 types of sentient beings within samsara we could have been connected to in previous lifetimes, and they could have been kind to us. So that's another way to transform it.
어다 가시게 보기 샤와만 뭐지 파쇼네라 유야도 요아라스. 근데 레비칼 이제 콜로로요 로멘에 드리지 달래가 쇼아레. 어다테 코스는 그 주야만데 이나존 키니모는 그 주고도스.
And another way to think about it is to think when the person behaves badly, actually like having mercy, thinking, oh, this poor sentient being, they don't have freedom from their afflictions. Because of the afflicted mind, right, there almost as a sick person who is behaving in this way. Therefore, don't point at the person as the cause of the misunderstanding, but instead point to the affliction. This is another possible way.
다다 여보지 이나요. 다 내가 다 할래비 노라 차와 가제 이나요. 이제 손노톤에 다다 티파 좀보자 아마도 그걸 군도 사와도 되는 거야.
So we know, like a good doctor, especially a good mental health doctor, when they are dealing with their patients, the patients will abuse them. They will say terrible things about them. But if it is a good doctor, the doctor will not get angry at them. Instead, they will feel love and compassion, understanding the lack of freedom of their situation.
된 우지치 다 가제 된다 그도 존주 세다 무대자 하고 그러와스 디돈에 바빌레 같이 하레스.
And so these are kind of some easy ways to apply how to transform obstacles into the path from this point of view of relative bodhicitta.
다 디운에 당한서 담을 때 바실레 돼요. 좋아?
And so we're probably at the end of transforming obstacles to the path connected with the relative bodhicitta.
쇼기 주바는 스티.
쇼구
주바.
주바레데. 알레 준주레.
대만 로자 디는 마진 로자.
랭강소 카와두. 겨와 군치.
세제노도 자와라 디니 미르베. 세제 아니
상게 추주 자와라.
디니 미세요스.
야.
다 디니면 로기 세제주레 세제노도 자와라 수지치는 자와라. 잘라 기제 대제데 세제라면 쩌유철. So
then as
저로서서 디니미 떼진 로자.
마레. ngaso cheer semchen tamchi topa mepa ne pama jenchen yimpe.
가와 되어서 쇼종.
디 쇼장 ngapa tama.
마라 된 로자 가서. 단단 된 로자 가서 됐어. 시보시죠.
Sorry, we're just trying to figure out where we are. Just give us a moment. Dene junjukle ya semchen nampa gyawala di dromason den. So we are at page 7, the quote from the Bodhisattva's way of life.
가르 세제노도 자와라.
야.
데르베.
야, dire.
같이 되는 로자르다. 세제노도 자와라 수지시는 자와라. 잘라 기제 대제데 세제라면 쩌유철.
Given that a Buddha's qualities are gained in dependence on ordinary beings and Buddhas alike, what sense is there in honoring only Buddhas while not respecting these ordinary beings?
Geshe
thinks that we covered this verse. I think that we didn't. So we're having a dispute. But anyways, if we did cover this verse, really we just covered it and didn't do the lines underneath. So we're pretty much in the right place. And so where does this quote fall, and also the material above it? This is all connected with taking those obstacles into the path through the teachings of relative bodhicitta. And thinking, no matter what obstacles that they cause, there is no sentient being who I can point to and say that they are my enemy, because in terms of actually achieving my enlightenment, in terms of their contribution to me achieving my enlightenment, the kindness of the Buddhas and the kindness of the sentient beings is the same. It's like 50-50. Not one is kinder than the other. So there's a real contradiction in our behavior if we make sort of a big show of offering prostrations to the Buddhas and making offerings and so forth, and then we see sentient beings as our enemies and treat them badly, right? That doesn't match up. Sorry, I'm guessing.
진행가 말했던 뭐 아마지를 보게 짜침보 제야지 보게 지요나 하고서라 다 아마티 보게 다 할레비 짜침보 쓰고야서 보게 때를 연다게 다 냠바다 보체 셰린다 보체 가워체나 아마티 셀 가와 용도 와스.
So if there's a mother who has a child that she cherishes very much, and there's a person who gives that child a gift or helps them in some way, the mother will naturally rejoice and she will have a liking for the benefactor.
손질을 채와 피할 샤차와래 가워 용게에 간시되네 델리죠 생질을 보게 쪼워질 가제 가워지 가제 배도잖아 손지 tel라 때는 로메 봐도 니가
And so in the same way, if we think of the Buddha as a little bit like the mother, of course, the Buddha will be pleased with making offerings and offering praise. But maybe even more than that, if we help someone who is destitute, if we help someone who is suffering, the Buddha seeing that as their child, they will have a pleasing with us. They will be very pleased with us.
오다 던지 자다 되는다 오래 손지도 세진님 보다 된다 가로서 가르쳐 주다요 그것이라고 자는 지발에 돼요.
So the kindness of sentient beings and Buddhas in terms of us being able to reach enlightenment is the same.
손지도 고자라 손지도 세제라 딘용비 체연비 대다를 디체인 세제노라 숑바도 니지 좌도 고네 제도가 디디 달라노시 다기 되게 되노라 좀바샤고
For someone training to accomplish Buddhahood, Buddhas and sentient beings are equally in the extent of their kindness. We must therefore cultivate intense love, compassion for sentient beings. We must take on their negativity and suffering and give them our happiness and virtue. So we're now on page 8.
어때 모습이 잘해 좋아 대도하기 어디서 셔바터 달라 네바시비 먹고 뭐마이 슈나 내젠디 토마메바니 다기 마시네 코로그 디디 똥에라 만제바 다기 대신에 코와 등아 나소뉴시 추위 또지 녜제녜 대인바 고마시바도 다기 랭에지 그는 디타타 달라 네비 디바시비 시디인 저거 등아 뇨완제 달라 때는데 디르모 등아 뇨시 뇨완조완 디비 디비레 뇨다타 니진 뇨도 트와트고.
Yes. So, should we encounter harmful people or non-human beings in particular, let us consider how these harm doers have been our mother repeatedly throughout beginningless time. At those times, they did not shy away from unwholesome actions, suffering, and gossip in order to secure our well-being. This brought them various forms of suffering in samsara. Now, through the power of delusion, they do not recognize us, dear relatives from the past. Indeed, inspired by their own bad karma, they commit the negative act of harming us, which will only lead them to future suffering. Consider, therefore, how they have long endured suffering for our sake and how they will continue to do so in the future, and cultivate intense compassion for them.
어떤 게 뭘로 저기서 연애 시티노라 요아래 알아 어다 가르친 거 요아래서나 빼난 좀벌게 사용주 티가 여부 추시 레존에라 세제레레 가로서 맛 가르제진도 통가잖아 사존도 그러마도 마셔야 단다 줘야요.
So we can connect this kind of meditation with the teachings of Nagarjuna in Letter to a Friend, where he says that if we were to take like tiny little balls of dirt or tiny little round seeds and cover the entire surface of the earth with those tiny seeds, the number of those would not be sufficient to count our mothers from previous lives who have been kind to us.
다 마시리저도 총총로는 다 디바모 소nen가 소소가 된다를 내가 뭐 제요아래 될라 때는 강에 가제뇨요.
And think, often those mother sentient beings would engage with what was unwholesome solely for our benefit, solely to try and help us. And they would have to meet the consequences of the suffering. Think of their lack of self-concern in showing us that kindness.
어다든지 소노토네 다 니제 소노토네 다 니가 마리바도 디바자 간조 마통아레 마도 어다 니네 소소가 니 자치 모레디요.
So think of them with compassion and understand that all of them have been close to us or kind to us. It's just that we can't see that directly right now because of this veil of ignorance that obscures our vision. Even if you are a lover of animals, if you look at how the mother animals take care of their young, you can see the great compassion and concern that they have to take care of them. Many animals will have no problem sacrificing their own lives if it is going to protect their children. So in this way, cultivate intense compassion for them is what the text instructs.
나는 니엔들라 네반바시 시장도 다는 디 네바사시 펜바드바 샤고 뇨토 소라 다다 바등이 다니가 다 팔레라 네바마도 다 대와 대시 퍼스토바 더톰도 다는 이 디텐데 대시 퍼스토바 저기.
So think, in the past I only did them harm. Now I shall dispel all their hurt and bring about their benefit. Think of that.
돈을 더도 고 사돈을 고 세탁만 뭐시에 살때는 드리우다 같이 뭐 떼지라지오스.
And meditate intensively on Tonglen, giving and taking. This was mentioned a little bit previously in the text, so we covered this, but we will touch on it briefly just again.
다 동어 또 돈을 고들 레라고 진지 깔레카고 다 라턴 차로도 마술 고 여와 뭐지 된데 요사레스.
So Tonglen can be proposed as a practice with kind of like many different increments or different levels. We could talk about sort of a limited field Tonglen, a middling field Tonglen, and a vast field of Tonglen or taking and giving.
어떤 대원 다 내준다 자원노라 요아래 대원노라 요아래 아카사라와 돈보로 단에 돈보 다 롱사는 고조쇼 사탄의 용도디 와스.
And so in the text and also in the commentaries and the oral instructions of many lamas, it says first, practice taking and giving using yourself, right? Using yourself.
다 나로서 강가 드리테 양만 도메케서나 뭐디 그 데워시 달 나조 릴라워치 계시바 이나스.
So to kind of propose how to do this in a very easy way.
다 나로서 강가 로로 다 나이네 다 야마티 강에 뭐더니 제인디 와스.
Yeah.
다 대야 되네야 대도 된다와 다 소소선 거나요 아리 제고나요 구마나요 아리 보카리나 나요 와스.
So we can think of like some kind of physical suffering that we experience. So Geshe often thinks of his hay fever, his allergies, which this time of year kind of afflict him. But you can also think of any type of physical discomfort, like if you're prone to headaches, if you have like digestive or intestinal issues, if you have pains in your body, you can think of these.
다 던디가리는 가제 떠들하돌라면 세 디네서 왔다 좀 많이 말아. 다 소소소노 간에서 또 가르세나 제 타미가 강에 간지지나. 샤와시망 예수고 용게 강에 간지지나. 나잔 디틴도 몸바쇼 세 디네 다 타제 거야.
So what you can do here, this is the easy presentation of the taking and giving, taking yourself as an object, is you can pray single-pointedly to the Lama and the Yidam, thinking that through my experiencing the suffering of this illness, the suffering of this discomfort now, may I purify causes of possibly more serious illness or causes of a difficult death. In this way, may this be purified.
하고서 다 던디선을 오다 세 디네 던디산을 제바이나 랭야바 좀 도그르서 다시 또 막간게 숨게 된데 이 비지라 와스.
And if we are able to think in this way, then that experience of sickness or discomfort can be transformed into a way to purify negative karma that could lead to possibly worse suffering in the future. Many lamas' essential instructions and scriptures indicate
다
this.
지그런 진실게 내가 말다. 대롱 진실 요비 손에 내가 지금 왔어.
So what is the lack in this approach to Tonglen? The lack in this approach to Tonglen is if you practice this way, it's not acting as an antidote to your self-cherishing. In fact, you could even make the argument that in worst case scenario, it might enhance your self-cherishing.
아치도 뭐 로진지 다 요나 다 된데 저를 제야 로진지 다 예니 멘지 슈치원데 그거 말아 왔어.
Yeah. So Geshe said, we understand that this is a facet of the practice of a Tonglen, and it's not necessarily that it needs to be cultivated as an antidote to self-cherishing right from the beginning, but we understand there is that lack. Yeah?
다시부터 봐서 세계 요아래 다 대소식 된다라고 던져와 침모지 요아 이제 땡데시에 토그를 시에 자시야 되고요.
But also because it's not targeting that self-cherishing, and this way of practicing Tonglen is something that gives us like a visible benefit for ourselves, that's an easy way to get used to doing the practice as a beginner in our mind, right? Many lamas explain like
다
that.
소소가 텐디가 강에 샤와 시명 예수 다 강에 강가 칠레네 뚫어들 세야 보지 고소나 다 되올리라고 요마로 왔어. 이제 세야 보지 고소나 다 소소가 예산을 파제 자치르도나 땡데 코론도야지 요아레.
So if we're able to do that, to take on one's own kind of future suffering by experiencing that difficulty and do taking and giving in that way, and really reach that kind of measure of being able to do that, which is not necessarily so easy for everybody. But if we're able to reach that, then the next step is we can expand that to those people who are close to us, who are suffering.
다 대용 다 나로서 강가 도파서 보이세 텔라테네 오소소를 지진 강에티 니네 레반다고 도파 요하나 다 소소 나자티 다 강게 고쳐 반다고 현재 강게 나사 강에 강가 고쳐 반다고 소노토나 대깔레기 문와스.
Again?
소소 나사 지와로 왔어. 어다 디가 강기 대전은 소설 뭐 마소는 또 그거 왔어.
Yeah.
시와시미 강에.
Yeah.
겨우 강행이네 지 휴처럼 로고요 살서 도바사나.
Yeah. 하고서.
딜리 좀 릴라가.
Yeah.
소소 강에 디가 다 로고 강에 마고비 강에. 세계전도 강에 강기 차다고 고쳐 봐슈.
네.
소소 강에 지와로 와.
Yeah.
딜리라레스.
So it's a little bit easier when we do the taking and giving practice, rather than taking on the suffering of others into ourself as a first step, to use the problem that we're already experiencing, right? The discomfort or the illness that we mentioned, and to think by my experiencing this, may sentient beings' karma to experience a similar difficulty being completely purified. That can be an easier first step than actually taking on the suffering.
어다 텔레테 여러 또이나 소소가 다시 와 신명게 당에서 강에라 소바데도 치 레네라 하고서로 소소가 단이가 노는 로 진는 걸로 봐 야네를 뭐소라고 소노토나 단이 바체가 쓰라레스.
But more powerful than that is to try to adjust this so that it's targeting the self-cherishing mind. So for example, we could think that this suffering that I am experiencing, think I am taking on the negativities, which are going to be the causes of future suffering for being reborn, for example, in the lower realms. And may I purify these, and imagine taking on those sufferings and those causes of sufferings of going to the lower realms. And we imagine these absorbing into us and destroying the self-cherishing at the heart. Oh, okay. Yes. So Geshe said that when you're taking on that future suffering into yourself and you're targeting the self-cherishing, you can have a visual image almost of like a meteor crashing to the ground, and it's just kind of crashing in there and completely obliterating the self-cherishing. We can think in this way that the self-cherishing has been completely obliterated, as well as any possible causes of difficulty have been cleared away.
So Geshe
said we'll end that discussion here and meditate intensively on Tonglen, giving and taking, because these he gave a vaster instruction previously. Yeah, so Tong is to give and Len is to take. And so giving away happiness and its causes, this is a practice of love, and taking on suffering and its cause, this is a practice of compassion. Do whatever you can to benefit visible beings such as humans or dogs directly. Even if you cannot do this, at least make the wish that they might be free from suffering, gain happiness, and swiftly attain enlightenment. Make this heartfelt aspiration and even recite it aloud. Generate the intention that whatever virtuous acts you perform from now will be for their sake. So Geshe said that, developing that feeling of compassion, that wish to help when you see a sentient being that is suffering, even, better than that, using your words to somehow offer kind of refuge and solace. This is very powerful. Yeah. So generate the intention that whatever virtuous acts you perform from now on will be for their sake. This is really connected with that mind generation, right? With bodhicitta. So Dharamsala lebne ngumatsu. Yeah, so there was a practitioner who arrived in Dharamsala, and he had arrived after having to spend about 20 years in prison. political prisoner, right?
강에 첨부 태카시 슈송스 근데도 몰래 대장이 왔어.
And His Holiness asked him, like, what were the greatest difficulties that you experienced in prison? And he said, there were a few different difficulties that I experienced.
아니 근데고 다소는 년간다고 태카시 슈서라 엔다고도 뭐도 대송스 근데고.
And so the Dalai Lama, he thought, maybe there were times where he thought that he would lose his life or something. So that would be like very frightening, right?
다 워낙 강에 첨부 태카시 가는 슈송스 계절적이가 오 쇼바도 니지 녀야가 다 디세 가시 슈송스.
But instead, he answered His Holiness, and he said, actually, there were times where I thought my love and compassion, where I would lose them or where they would degenerate.
So
His Holiness was really impressed, right, with that sort of mindset. So really, in order to stabilize our love and compassion, we see here from the text, whatever sort of method or ways of thinking, we kind of need to take those on board and try to apply them. If the harm doer is a god or spirit, think, throughout beginningless time I have consumed your flesh and blood. So now in return I offer you my own flesh, blood, and so on. So this one's maybe a bit more challenging. Correct. So Geshe said, what would be a practical application of this, like maybe in a modern way of thinking? It would be those people who donate like one of their kidneys or part of their liver and so forth to those who need them. That would sort of be a modern example. And of course, especially if you don't know the person who you're giving it to, that's not such an easy thing to do, is it? So mentally dissect your body in the presence of the harm doer and surrender it by thinking and even saying aloud, eat my flesh and bones, drink my blood. So maybe this isn't something that most of us are going to be capable of doing right now, but we can have this aspiration, right, of being able to, in the future, have the capacity to really benefit others in this way. So remember the caveat here in the scriptures. It says that the time to practice this type of generosity is the time where giving away one's body is no more disturbing to the mind than giving away a plate of old vegetables, right? Consider that the harm doer's hunger and thirst are pacified through the consumption of your flesh. Unadulterated bliss fills their body and mind, and they master the twofold bodhicitta. So this way of thinking and sort of connecting this with bliss and the achievement of the two bodhicittas, this is really kind of connected more with the tantric presentation. But if we can think in this way, it's something that's very beneficial for the mind. So to apply these points of practice is probably not going to be easy for us, but what we can do is we can take them as something to aspire to, and also we can take these ways of thinking as a way of like protecting our mind against afflictions. So Geshe has some friends who really, through their tantric practice, where they're engaging in the meditations, for example, on the lights and nectars and imagining how these are providing beings with all they need and getting rid of their suffering, leading them to enlightenment and so forth. They say that when they practice this, it brings forth an uncommon happiness within the mind. And that happiness that comes from their practice is a great protection for the mind as they go through the day, right? So these are people who are really doing the practice.
오다 제바시기 디생한도 세 디세지야레 이네 파진이 반열어주게 디세지야 되지 다다도서 가레스.
So all of these can be kind of practiced as a way of like cultivating our mind, but to practice like these kind of givings in reality, right? We have to really know at what level of attainment this actually becomes possible, right? It's important to differentiate here.
오가가 두야 오다 두야 두버치모지야 기세는 오다가서 할레위 계사 찾아서 엄마 맞아. 엄마 떠버지라 너로면서
yeah. And so even as we become a more experienced practitioner, one of Geshe's friends, he said, like we're kind of like in a weird space in terms of knowing what instructions to apply, because through our study and practice, we may no longer be a limited faculty disciple, but neither are we a sharp faculty disciple yet either. We're like somewhere in between. So sometimes it's hard to know what to do. Yeah, because of the sharp faculty, the realized practitioner, they just practice like exactly according to the words without any concern. They can do that, right? Yeah, so the limited faculty disciple who hasn't yet achieved a pramana of valid cognition, right? They just kind of, without the facet of experience, have to have faith in the words and try to practice them accordingly.
So when we're
kind of in the middle between those two things, between the like beginner's understanding and like before the actual advanced capacity to practice, right? It can be kind of difficult to know which direction to go. So what we want to do through our study is really develop a certainty that in terms of the practice, this is the way to proceed, to have that kind of confidence and to be able to practice without doubt, right? That is really going to be helpful. But before the practice, before the application, when we're still investigating in our study of the teaching, then having doubts, having questions, this can actually be very beneficial.
오야 도제천에 대시게와지바 동성주지 세연이노비 대다도 샤라스사이 란데리 지니야바 통제라다기 링아다 아심 도제천에 대시게와지바 솜 대다나 예바 도제도 진질리 쉰디비 델라 다타라.
So unadulterated bliss fills their body. Consider that the harm doers' hunger and thirst are pacified through the consumption of your flesh. Bliss fills their body and mind. They master twofold bodhicitta. Imagine that you offer your body to all the gods and spirits that consume flesh and blood in just the same way, and that they all become satisfied, happy, and virtuous. Thus, since all faults arise from self-cherishing, recognize it as the enemy.
펜바도 대화 강가로로더니 센치리 쉰디비 대달라 니엔데 띠라 페쩌도샤.
And since all benefit and happiness come from sentient beings, view them as close allies and do whatever you can to help them.
Not a
single sentient being is our enemy. The true enemy is the self-cherishing, self-grasping. This is a very important point. So all sentient beings are the basis of what we can cultivate to achieve that temporary and ultimate happiness. Because of that, they are precious. So therefore, thinking about dependent arising is important. So let us touch on our text about dependent arising.
This one?
Listen.
Chechi dinimiro.
Chechi
lame tevi se dinimiro.
Yeah.
Chechi lame tevi se ye do maybe tapon de chejin dewa lutemba lodo yule kaditsa cheme chimbi chekoji suira kala tumeje tanzani ge mombasi lumi jeka seneba pade dai lesheji gege ten sachi ba lame tenji tun da ki yije ngaso tenro sarwa.
Yeah.
Tipadro sar. Han zeba kali sungenen zeba chui deina deyuna 대니 이제 개바 인들의 수지 지대시
So we're just going over the verse that we covered last time and then doing one of the new verses. So when with the kindness of my lamas, I saw this unsurpassed vehicle of yours leaving behind extremes of existence and non-existence, elucidated by the prophesied Nagarjuna, his lotus
해질로
scroll.
먹게 된다서
Sorry, Geshe doesn't want me to read everything he read. So we'll just read verse number 52 then. Of all the Buddha's deeds, his words were the greatest, and they were the words of dependent arising. Let the wise, therefore, remember him this way.
지들은 저세요. 어서서 다 손직은 잡았들 끄인 잡아 숭인 잡아 튀긴 잡아 다녀서 뭐지 요하래.
So of course, when we talk about the activities and the qualities of the Buddha, we talk about the activities of the holy body, as the holy speech and the holy mind, right?
어떤 잡아자 최소의 숭인 잡아지 이승이 요하래.
But the most important, the most precious of these are those of holy speech, actually.
어다 대이자 다수의 숭인 잡아 tel라테네 다 나로스 단다 바도 손지 코르페는 로니 둥아잔 로사르테 단다이나 인간도 로조 요레 tel라테네 다 보게 여보 뭐버지요 바데 숭기
So we can see actually that 2,500 years after the Buddha's parinibbana, based upon his speech, we have all of these instructions that we are able to study and practice, through which we can achieve our mind and work towards good things. So in this way, we see the amazing enlightened activities still enabled by his holy speech.
다 던지고 돈에 다 손지 지제속이나 숭인 잡아라테네 갈패도 간르시도
So we really want to understand in terms of the Buddha's benefiting the world, how he did this based upon the holy speech.
당하신 왔어. 때티 지서라라라도 수제데 자예수라 용바 머메시 난조시라 제비 개노시 주시 첨보텔라 대다기.
Becoming ordained into the way of the Buddha by not being lax in study of his words and by yoga practice of great resolve, this monk devotes himself to that great purveyor of truth.
하코사라와 다 때tem바 디지서는 라도 수ite 언든 로주도 녀레다 멤버스나 모두 가지 터터 제시 shum바다 가와서 보여 보시소.
So Lama Tsongkhapa, reflecting on his own experience, to be able to leave the home life, in other words, to practice monasticism, and on that basis to be able to study and practice with effort the words of the Buddha, feeling very fortunate.
tembalana maybe 다 ngaji ngaji tembalana maybe tembaden jawanda lamiti gewande ndo male bashinye tombinze pijerngo.
Due to the kindness of my lamas, I have met the teachings of the greatest of teachers. I dedicate this virtue, therefore, for every living being to be nourished by true spiritual friends.
Lama Tsongkhapa koro mase tele tendika ta sonji tembano ja trishumba tinga lami karila tene shuso tanda ina gawa ko so ba ta sonji mato ba nga ndo ko ya isa ane ta shinye apochi to chebi jelongo. So
Lama Tsongkhapa, what he achieved up until this point, it is solely through the kindness of his lamas, and then as he achieved this benefit, then may every lifetime may go. Yes. And so then in lifetime to lifetime in the future, may he and all beings be able to meet qualified virtuous friends, spiritual teachers. I pray that the teachings of he who is solely benevolent remain unscattered by the winds of false views until the end of time, and with faith in the Buddha gained from understanding their essential nature, may they pervade forever.
오다 손지가 던지가 자 첨보가 다 로도 던지가 내서 아버지 뭐 수요하라 왔어 이나요 다 선방양 봐도 조왕양 봐도 다 던지가 같이 뭐 실라테네 다 보게 내와지고 같이 뭐 누웠어.
So the Buddha laid out all of these paths through his speech, through which all of these good things can be achieved. Yet there are those who have the obstacles of hearing negative thoughts or being influenced by evildoers and so forth. So may these be cleared away.
가서 터터더니 손지가 땜비게 내서 얘네들 신이라.
So may one banish bad thoughts and obstacles from within one's mind, and then accordingly may one be able to gain the correct understanding of the teachings. So then in all my births, even at the cost, in all my births, even at the cost of my life, may I never falter nor shrink from working for the wonderful doctrine of the mighty Buddha, who showed clearly the nature of dependent arising.
오다 때는 중앙 땡주가 내서라 때는 다 대시카가 대야가 손지가 다 뉴스 들이 자침보 지야래 다 대시와는 샤와 리도 소도 기시나에 간데 같이 주나에 다 디가 같이 제모도 봐 그러면 점아쇼
So because the Buddha's teachings, especially on dependent arising, are the source of all happiness for sentient beings, then may I from lifetime to lifetime continue to serve those teachings, even without regard if it should cost me my life. May I have that kind of determination from lifetime to lifetime to serve the teachings.
ndemba ngachongadi ndemba chote kawa tomeji neten imbonje jwanda ta gongshike pyawan jenyombe nomba chebe nyendawa sho
I pray that I pass my days and nights in thinking how I might spread this dharma born from heroic perseverance in the face of countless hardships of this supreme guide.
oda deja dajoge temba shijata ba koro kawa tome mombol kalejane tendriga ta pge ya
So it also keeping in mind with this verse that it was through exerting himself in accumulations over 3 countless eons that Lord Buddha Shakyamuni was able to present this doctrine to us. So keeping that joyous effort in mind. And so because that system is so excellent and the result of such great effort over 3 eons, then I must, with very skillful means, try to practice that system continuously.
ndiswa tanga chingaje patama laso to bi sinde tsebe na chudong mo jite shwa de le de na bola so sume yo me ba to de zhuxie shu.
When I pursue these endeavors wholeheartedly and sincerely, may I be supported constantly by Brahma, Indra, Mahakala, the 4 guardians of the world, and all other protectors.
So
really thinking that because with a pure intention I have brought forth this effort within my study and practice, then accordingly may the gods and the protectors, right, continuously help me to reach my goal. So this is just explaining Lama Tsongkhapa explaining I, the Bhikshu Lama Tsongkhapa, have composed this text. Chekawa again?
Gadi number element number jaili gadi saro
so
number jaili na ji
yeah, so Geshe said that he believes this was composed at Ganden Monastery. Otherwise, the colophon is giving like the name of the hermitage where he composed this. So Geshe just reading the colophon for that sense of completion.
So
Geshe is wondering, actually, he said he's not sure because this place name here is a bit ambiguous, if this was a place actually in Ganden Monastery or if this was a hermitage where Lama Tsongkhapa was doing retreat and came to this understanding of dependent arising.
So
So Geshe reading the first verse of this text again to have an auspicious circumstance so that we can approach it again in the future. So now that we have finished in praise of dependent arising, we'll be continuing with the Lojong teachings, but as the second text, what we'll actually be doing is taking verses from the 400 standas by Arya Deva. So that is what we will do. And Manoshi, I wasn't able to find a publicly available edition, but Manoshi was. So we will post this up on the website before, so within 2 weeks from today, before we start. So Arya Deva was a student of Nagarjuna who, especially with concerns of his understanding of the ultimate view, was kind of like an unparalleled, an unmistaken student. And so there are also many different commentaries on the 400 verses by Arya Deva. Well, one of the most famous of these was composed by the glorious Chandrakirti, another great pandita of the Majapaka.
Padi dawa traba senatala lama Zangka palan jombe yoga. Padi dawa trabi sumba tili yishi Gyalse jatwa chechu toba sam gusini tatris yoga lama chires.
So remember also that in Lama Tsongkhapa's encounter with Manjushri, Manjushri instructed him that in terms of the Lama whose unmistaken instructions you can completely rely on without a doubt, they are the instructions of the glorious Chandrakirti. So a very reliable commentator. And also Chandrakirti, in addition to being a great philosopher, he possessed great cities. Many of you are probably familiar with the story of how he was able to draw a picture of a cow on a wall and milk the picture to provide milk. And so actually how that happened is he fell in out of favor with the monastic authorities, and he was given a punishment that he would have to serve milk to the entire assembly. So his response to that was to draw a picture of a cow on the wall and milk the picture. Yeah, so when the 15th day, when he was supposed to make this offering of milk was coming, the monks were kind of curious, like, how is he going to get enough milk to feed the assembly? So they were looking around thinking he would be like buying some milk or like herding some cows or something, but they saw him like in the days up to this just relaxing in his room. So they were wondering kind of like what's going on, right? And his enemies were actually rejoicing because they thought, okay, he hasn't put any work into getting this offering together, so definitely we can get him expelled from the monastery, right, if he's not able to give this offering. Yeah, so then he just drew the picture of the cow on the wall when the day for the offering came, and he was able to fill all of the buckets of milk to feed the assembly. So thanks very much. We shall leave the teaching here. So with a happy mind, let us dedicate the merits.
Jangjo semjo rinpoche maje banam jejur ji jewa nyamba meba yang gone gonde bewa shu tongni tawa rinpoche maje banam jejur ji Jeba nyamba meba yang gone gonde bewa shu jambe pao jeda jemba no kundu zangpo deyang deje de da kundu jesu dalo je gewa de da tangje ra do mo desu shepe gyawa tangje ji ngawa kanla chodo ngaba de dagi gewe zawa nigo jong zangpo chechi rado ngawa.
Through the merits accumulated not only by ourselves, but by all sentient beings, we dedicate that all the calamities in the world of wars, conflicts, scarcity, disease, and so forth, may these be reduced and completely cleared away.
Tamma jabikala pasi kawaina nanzo shuriga madu tamma sudu sina ini rongome nanzo de jibareteni ta rongome tenji kangi teyo teji kanga apakaze tshwaji.
So when we think about the wars in the world, right, we don't necessarily need to think about the sides of the conflict in a biased way, because we understand that the civilians on the ground and all the people participating in the war, they are all human beings experiencing suffering. So we can really pray that through these merits that all the sufferings experienced by all sides may be completely cleared away.
노나 소망년바 강가 파시네타 손바좀보 파지톤 제네타 강가 대시 냐마샤지.
Through these merits, may all those who possess evil thoughts, may those evil thoughts be cleared away. May they give rise to wholesome thoughts. And accordingly, may the sun of happiness shine upon all 6 types of beings in samsara without exception. So we'll pause there. If you need to get on with your day, please feel free. But if you have some questions, please feel free to ask.
So
Geshe said, if there are questions, please ask. Dave, is there anything on Facebook maybe?
We did have one question coming in through Facebook earlier, which was a question around refuge. I don't remember exactly at what point Geshe said this is a refuge, or this is like going for refuge, but it was there was a question in Facebook asking for clarification. What did that mean?
Sorry, that's very ambiguous. What was the question asking about?
It was, can you clarify what refuge means used in those terms?
Which terms?
That's the thing.
That's where we don't know, right?
I don't remember exactly where Geshe or where you translated something as being refuge. What term it was that was refuge.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say to that.
I know it was kind of context dependent. Maybe Deliana can elaborate in the chat here.
Please ask them to clarify, and we'll come back if we can. I'd like to answer the question if we can, but I can't remember now out of the 2 hours what we said at that point.
No, I couldn't remember even a few minutes ago.
Kyamdro kolagi nesuchi gyore, kyamdro gi tsap dabuchi glabsane.
Me shandro tsadan Lama
songa.
Yeah, I don't see if Diliana is still.
In the meantime, does anyone else want to ask a question? We did talk a lot about the temporary benefits of refuge. So Geshe is thinking perhaps and going for refuge, what are the benefits that we experience right away? So this was talked about. Is there anybody on Zoom who has a question in the meantime while Dave clarifies? It's a quiet group today.
Lama, I have 3 questions.
Yes, please. I can. Please speak a little bit more loudly because I can't hear you so well.
Okay, Lama. Well, how is it possible that my projections are mixed with those of others? What is the factor that makes me a projection of another and the other is mine?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. If the appearance of the other person that you see is a projection, right? Then the version of you that the person is seeing, how is that a projection? Is that what you're asking?
Exactamente. Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. I think I got you. Nganso paropo di nganso nangwa re samlo tango gire dua. Ine nganso seri di nganso paropo di ginangwa yang res. Di kandestro gire ko ngarang di nangwa res nge korang di nangwa res. Di kandeshik samlo tango resa.
Mara noa chibo ina do hale mandiwas. Anjo noa mombochi.
Yeah.
Pasho tagaro korong ni chi yare sono tone.
So really what we're talking about here is not that the appearance is the whole of the person, whether ourself or the other, but we're talking about the appearance that we see, especially in terms of what is inaccurate about the way that object or that person is appearing to us. So specifically here, we could talk about the appearance of that other person as inherently existent, for example, and they would also perceive us as inherently existent. So actually there's no contradiction there, right? That we perceive that person as inherently existent because of our misperception, and they also perceive us as inherently existent because of the misperception.
이나 요미 미터와테 미터와 내가지요. 세som비 따와리네 되녀다지요.
But actually, he thinks that your question is a smart one, because if we think just on the level of appearance, we see that person just based upon what's in our mind. But then if that person is just an appearance based on what's in our mind, how do they perceive us just as an appearance based in their mind? And actually, so what you've pointed to is sort of a lack in the Chittamantran or the mind-only view.
다때 알게 제카데죠. 다 단다조 나로서 가르고 요다시기 알았잖아. 파쇼는 세자 요다 쉬소나.
Yes, yeah.
하고서
Yeah.
코 누자래 손스지 용요 알았어.
Yeah.
맞대.
Yeah. So, but what we were trying to focus on in today's lesson by talking about these appearances is when we meet a misunderstanding with someone, or when there's someone who we find difficult, we have this tendency to kind of just point and say, he or she is bad, right? That's kind of what our habit.
야샤 자토마 코 누자 따야가 손스테 디자로를 루지 집이 손 놓아지요. 리자지요.
And if we trace back this idea that we have that he or she is a terrible person, we can see this perception of them as terrible or completely bad. It is definitely related to that appearance we have of them as being inherently or truly existent.
오다 때때에서 슈슈로 돈을 다 코니바 메바지서 도서나 다 타지도 코 다레 코 누자레 다 슈로야.
So if we can reduce, the nice thing here is that on the appearance level, if we can just reduce that appearance of them being inherently existing on their own side, what we'll find as a result of that is our dislike of them, our labeling of them completely bad and so forth, that this will naturally be greatly reduced.
오다 딘디그로지 집에 놓아 디가 야버지 도서는 야 잡아 따와. 누버지 도서는 디 잡아 통하지만 저 되는 요다 저기.
So just to explain here what we're focusing on in appearance, the appearance of inherent existence of that person, it's very pernicious. In other words, it's very tricky, because if we like the person, it causes us to exaggerate and like them in a completely unrealistic way, to hold them up in a really unrealistic way, right? On the other end, if we dislike that person, grasping at them as inherently existent causes us to denigrate them, to have this completely unrealistic vision of them as like some terrible, horrible villain or something. So neither of those, the reification or the deprecation, is accurate. Yeah. So in this way, in terms of appearances, that appearance of inherent existence is like the king that is feeding our afflictions of attachment and aversion. And so if we don't do anything about that, if we just accept appearances as they are, then it's going to be very difficult to kind of reduce our attachment and aversion to the people we meet. But actually, in terms of us seeing that person as an appearance and them seeing us as an appearance, and that aspect of the appearance, for example, of inherent existence being mistaken, Geshe doesn't think there's any contradiction here. Yeah.
Sorry. I have 3
No problem. No, I think I understood your question, and hopefully we also got you an okay answer. Any other questions?
Yes.
Sorry, Lama.
Go ahead.
I have second. How the Dharmakaya and Rupakaya body appears? How it is not in the person? It is during life, or?
I couldn't hear that, Dave. Can you repeat the question? This sounds very faint for me.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
How the Dharmakaya and Rupakaya body appears?
Appear.
How it is not in the person? Is during life, or when it appears that body?
Oh, okay. Yes. When does it appear? During the life of the person who achieves enlightenment, or how does it appear? Okay. Yep. I understand. Nganso di suku dang choku densorwa nangwa kandes yongyores, kandes togyores, sangi togyen gi mitsegi nangula togyores, chiwa gi jelo togyores, kadu togyores.
다 대남다 다 맞게 놀러 터도 다 리라고요 말게 뭐라 왔어 가시 달로 질이야.
So it's very rare, but sometimes the person will achieve the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya, the truth body and the form body, in that life, and those will arise in that life in some cases.
다 된다 간디스 토그르서 빼나 가서 강가지 바래 가로서 단다 가가세 하지 마시 이사지 나세 하지 알아. 시 강가 파세
Yeah.
하고서
Yeah.
다 예때 강가 토가 토야 강가 치토소나
Yeah.
대니 레브 롬에 발레
So, and really, in terms of when this happens, it's that being who is cultivating towards enlightenment at that moment when they have completely eradicated all faults and fully developed and perfected all qualities. At the moment that that is achieved, the Dharmakaya, the truth body, and the Rupakaya, the form body, arise.
다 된다 손지선 더가로르다 연다 손으로 또 그말 시 강가 파메바 쳐 예때 강가 토가 강가 치토자소나 될 손지선이가
And when we talk about what a Buddha is, actually, it doesn't need to be so mysterious in a way. When a being has completely eradicated every single unwholesome thing together with their imprints, and when they have completely perfected and reached the pinnacle of every positive quality, at that moment, they are a Buddha. We can think of it like that.
다 손지토소나 당연히 도교하래 된다.
And when Buddhahood is achieved, correspondingly, these two bodies are achieved, the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya.
나로서 그 세도 세가 똥반이 돼 루데치크세 하죠라고 말했어.
And so the mind and the mind's emptiness, these transform into the Dharmakaya, the truth body through which one's own welfare is achieved.
And
the self, that we call the I, this transforms into the Rupakaya, the form body through which one achieves the welfare of others. So we can talk about in this presentation of either the two bodies. We also talk about in a presentation of the four bodies. But at that moment that the enlightenment is reached, those bodies will appear. They will, manifest is a better word. They will manifest. So really, when we're first kind of thinking about these, to remember these phrases, the means through which one's own welfare is achieved, the Dharmakaya, the truth body, the means through which the welfare of others is achieved, the Rupakaya, the form body. This is really important to remember. Because we've completely purified our mind, right? We've completely purified it, and then we can experience only sort of the best sort of abiding, then for one's own welfare, the Dharmakaya. And because of achieving method, we can look at sentient beings and know the very best possible way to manifest and to try to provide for their needs. We can manifest the Rupakaya to benefit others. And actually, when we speak from the point of view of the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhisattva, he or she, their main object of attainment is actually not the Dharmakaya, right? It's not the truth body. It's actually the Rupakaya, the form body, because that's the means through which Buddhas achieve the welfare of others. However, if we don't achieve the Dharmakaya, we won't be able to manifest the Rupakaya. So therefore, we can't say one is more important, actually. No, so that's Geshe's comments on that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, there are 4, not 3. Sorry, please. Okay, thank you so much. The other one is is relative bodhicitta a desire, an ultimate bodhicitta an action?
Okay, nanso kunzup jangchu gisem di depa res dundang jangchu gisemba di chawa res di labna digirebes.
Mara. Nika ta koroi karish chawa shekenda we karis ijire nika.
No, we can't say that. In fact, they're both kind of determinations in a way. But they have different objects. They're both minds. We can say that relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta are both minds. So the mind that looks to sentient beings and out of compassion thinks I must achieve Buddhahood for their benefit. This is the mind of relative bodhicitta. With that aspiration, the mind that then contemplates emptiness, that is ultimate bodhicitta. So, and this is not the sort of the very refined state of the practice, but this is how we practice thinking about it from the point of view of application. So in terms of how they are achieved, relative bodhicitta is when one first Yep. Yeah. So the relative bodhicitta is achieved by the bodhisattva when they first achieve the state of a bodhisattva, and the ultimate bodhicitta is realized only by bodhicittas on the path of seeing or beyond. In other words, only by bodhisattvas who have had that direct realization of emptiness. But in terms of trying to practice both relative and ultimate bodhicitta, these are things we can do right now. Dave, I see your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah. No, sorry, Lama. Sorry, please. I want to know why this humanity has the self-cherishing. Why?
Okay, can this be the last question though? Because I want other people to get a question as well. Is that okay?
Okay, Lama. Thank you.
Okay. Nansa rang chenzen di kare chene yeres. Mi chatsangwa rang chenzen di kare chene yeres.
Mi kare chene yeres chi yamarda tel pikomba chimbo ronza chimbore ngal deshi goyo ngal yapo goyo sa sonse shu tabo yisa tela tene jepoge.
It's because of our habituation of seeing ourselves as the most important. So seeing our own happiness, seeing our own success as being more important. And because of stressing that importance, then disregarding sentient beings, right? That's the reason. Yeah, and so like actually His Holiness the Dalai Lama says little children, they don't necessarily have that attitude of seeking advantage. So they just eat their food and play their games without that. But as we get older, we start being more and more self-concerned. So we develop that self-cherishing. So it comes from habituation is the short answer. Did that answer your question?
Maybe that was the last question.
Okay, so that's okay. Sorry, I think I scared her away, but I just saw other hands up, so I also wanted to make sure we got to other folks. Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Martha, for those questions. Yeah. So there's a question from Amy. How do you deal with situations where showing compassion for one being could cause harm for the other? For example, in the case of the example of showing compassion for the bull, wasn't it in turn showing a lack of compassion for the students who are left waiting?
Nansa ninje nyamlen chepe kaprula rwa dene soso ninje kesa ni yona chik ninje sone jendag di kandeslaugare duru droya kandes chik samlo tangore perna tokme sampo ding nangla ko bachu mahi di sachempo sine rwa di ninje keso yine gudeagi puku gudeagi getru din so rwa ninje tes nyungo da pochi droswa konso sachempo masine di sachempo so ninje kesa ni yona kandes yewa chegasa
meme ta te kange chejul da was konso gudeama da leka kimndo ko kange chembo chene ko shaswas.
So Geshe says in the case of the bull, like the students had the inconvenience of waiting, but he thinks in this case, emphasizing the bull was correct because the bull had died and was very sick and needed some help. So he thinks it's natural that you see that where the need is greater. And in this case, the need of the bull or the cow would be greater than the needs of the students.
That thing also niji korondo to terwas. Ki was a hale kange mekechi na niji chesi Chekawa ya haris. Kange meketela. Kange chega you get niji she lila was.
Yeah. So Geshe said that actually, like, it's also how our compassion manifests, right? If we look at how compassion manifests in terms of somebody experiencing a slight suffering and someone experiencing a terrible suffering, we'll see that it arises kind of more naturally and easily for the person experiencing the terrible suffering.
pena tanga roina TV na ta derela ta ni committee na ta derela
Mhm.
luwa yanda ka ta manda ma che jo le ka mo che ga te te jela ni ji hala yo mo duas
Yeah,
ta na mo ja jin bi ka ta mo phasi ka wa yina
yeah.
mama yo wa chi mo duas
Yeah.
basi mama yo ko do ro yo mare
Yeah,
ko
yeah.
ni je se ni ji ro me ba yo chi duas
Ah, tu conta quebra ya poco más, ¿no?
mama le le de o ke jela ka le do yo was
Ale,
ina ni ji le la wo ko mo duas
Oh, right. So
ta
Geshe,
le wa ma ja ke
yeah,
yina mama se yina yo mo dus
so Geshe mentions when he's watching the news or something, right? And he often tries to develop compassion for people in the world experiencing difficulties when he watches the news, right? So when he there's a war, right? And when footage is coming on just showing the troops, the soldiers being deployed or maybe like resting in their tents, the feeling of compassion doesn't come as strongly. But when he sees the footage of them being injured in battle, right? Or soldiers and civilians who are wounded, right? Then it's much easier for him to bring forth this feeling of compassion.
wa lu ba si na che ba mo du ta ni je kon do ro yo mare ki wo za da ga ba ni yo ar ta ni ro yo mare ni je ni ne duas
And because then you really see like, oh my gosh, they didn't have any decision of whether to be participants in this battle, in this war, but they were wounded, they experienced this terrible suffering. And then like a feeling of compassion naturally wells up.
ya ne so
Yeah. So I guess that's his answer. I'm not sure if it answers the question exactly, but let's leave it there. Yeah, but Geshe said, like in the case of Tokme Zangpo's story, you can think that the students were just, drinking tea and hanging out and maybe having a good time, and they weren't suffering so much because of his lateness. Hopefully, we hope. Yeah. So maybe they were in a good place and not suffering too much from waiting. Okay, Annie, I think I see a hand.
Yes, this is actually not so much in relation to what Geshe was just teaching about, but I was curious about the last verse of the praise on dependent arising, why he asks to be supported by Brahma and Indra.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nganso the Tsikche Tamadi, Nganso Sangpa dang Wangpo sunkyop chegiyares, konso jiktengilares, ko karechene ropa shugiyares, da wachi. Sangpa dang Wangpo.
Ale, so do me jiteshu wa. De na bo la so sume lo. Me ta konso ri na ma yo ara. Was ka so la gai ga la mo yo ara. Es. Ya wa de ka gai la mo.
So Geshe says there doesn't necessarily need to be a contradiction here, because Brahma and Indra are classified as deities who have a liking to virtue. So although they are worldly, they naturally help those who are engaged in virtue. Yeah. So he thinks that's why they would be mentioned here.
Okay.
But yes, he sees why, because they're not.
They
They wouldn't be objects of refuge for a Buddhist, right? So so natural to wonder that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So it seems that a natural silence has happened. So I think on that note, I'll just let Geshe say goodbye to everybody. Remember, next weekend we are off, but after that we have things every week. We start into our season. Yomare.
Ya tiche ta idele kanga.
Have a wonderful holiday.
Bye. Thank you, Venerable Kadrup and Geshe. Thank you.
We've had people here from many places in the world, from Europe, many places in Europe, many places in the United States and Canada, from India and Tibet. So it's amazing to feel like we're kind of all drawn together and have a close feeling.
No, it is amazing through technology that we can create a sangha of all people in the world. I think that's like Yeah. So Geshe said technology, when used for a good purpose, it can be very beneficial.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks for the questions.
teacher. This one.